A Spanish commander once wrote home to Madrid and described something that stopped his pen mid-sentence. He called it a dance that kills. He didn't have a better word for it. He'd watched trained soldiers, men who had crossed oceans, survived storms, conquered empires, get dismantled by barefoot islanders with sticks, not overwhelmed by numbers, dismantled, systematically, like they were being taught a lesson. That letter survived. The art it described almost didn't. This is the story of Arnis, or Eskrima, or Kali. It has three names because three different colonial powers tried three different times to erase it, and each one failed. What they left behind in their failure tells you more about ancient Filipino civilization than any museum exhibit ever could. Let's start where it actually started. Not in a gym, not in a dojo, not in any building at all. The earliest practitioners of what we now call Arnis didn't think of themselves as martial artists. They were farmers, fishermen, traders who traveled between islands in outribbit boats called balangay. The weapon of choice wasn't exotic. It was a stick, a rattan cane, the kind that grew everywhere in the archipelago. You cut it from the forest, you used it to clear brush, you used it to move cargo, and when someone tried to take your cargo, your boat, or your life, you used it differently. That's the origin, brutally practical. But here's what separates Arnis from other practical fighting systems. It didn't stay primitive. Over centuries, Filipino warriors refined it into something that operated on principles that modern combat trainers are still unpacking today. The system moved from the weapon to the hand, not the other way around. Most martial arts teach you to fight with your hands first, then introduce a weapon as an extension. Arnis flips that logic entirely. You learn the blade or the stick first. Your empty hand becomes the backup, and even then, your empty hand moves like it's still holding something. The muscle memory transfers both directions. One system, multiple expressions. Weaponized geometry, that's what one modern practitioner called it, and that description fits. The 16th century arrives, and with it, the Spanish. Ferdinand Magellan lands in the Visayas in 1521. He's been told these islands are inhabited by scattered primitive tribes. He comes ashore at Mactan, a small island near Cebu, expecting the kind of submission he'd seen everywhere else his fleet had traveled. What he gets is Lapu-Lapu, a datu, a chieftain, a man who had zero interest in submission. The battle at Mactan on April 27, 1521, kills Magellan. The Spanish fleet retreats. Magellan doesn't come home. Stop for a second. Let's say this is enormous. Magellan had circumnavigated the known world. He had survived Cape Horn. He had faced hostile encounters across 3 oceans. He died on a small island, killed by men armed with weapons the Spanish dismissed as primitive. The accounts from survivors describe Filipino fighters closing distance at terrifying speed, working inside the effective range of Spanish pikes and swords, using a style of combat that Spanish armor, designed for European battlefield distances, simply wasn't built to handle. Close range, fluid, relentless. The Spanish didn't come back immediately. When they did, 44 years later under Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, they came with a different strategy. They brought priests alongside soldiers. The sword and the cross, as the saying goes. But even then, even in the decades of colonization that followed, Spanish military reports kept noting the same problem. Filipino warriors, particularly in the Visayas, in Mindanao and Pampanga, weren't fighting like conquered people. They were fighting like instructors correcting bad form. All right. The Spanish response was pragmatic and cold. They banned the practice of Arnis, not just the weapons, the practice itself. Carrying a bolo, a traditional Filipino blade, without permission became a criminal offense. Gathering to train became suspicious. The colonial administration understood, probably better than they wanted to admit, that a fighting system isn't just physical. It carries memory. It transmits identity from body to body, generation to generation, without a single word written down. Kill the practice, you kill the continuity. Kill the continuity, you break the people. It almost worked. Almost. Filipino communities did something elegant. They hid Arnis inside performance. The sayaw, traditional dances, already incorporated stylized weapons movements, so practitioners formalized the disguise. They made the training look like theater. Festivals, religious celebrations, cultural performances all became cover for drilling the same footwork patterns, the same blade angles, the same flowing combinations that made Spanish soldiers write alarmed letters home. The church watched, the priests watched, and what they saw looked like devotion and culture. Moving on, it was also a weapons class. This is the moment where the art became something larger than any individual teacher. When you have to hide knowledge inside ritual, inside celebration, inside the bones of a culture, the knowledge becomes the culture. Arnis stopped being a skill set and became a survival code written into the Filipino body itself. 3 centuries pass. The Spanish hold, then crack. By the 19th century, Filipino revolutionary movements are using Arnis-trained fighters as their core combatants. The Katipunan, the revolutionary society led by Andres Bonifacio, doesn't arm its members with rifles. Rifles are expensive, rare, controlled. They arm them with bolos, and they train them in the same system that Filipino ancestors refined across generations of conflict. Bonifacio himself came from a poor background. He wasn't military trained in any colonial institution. What he knew, he learned from Filipino sources. The fighting doctrine of the revolution was indigenous. The 1896 Philippine Revolution doesn't get nearly enough credit in global history. Historians outside the Philippines tend to frame it as a backdrop to the Spanish-American War of 1898, as if the Filipinos were furniture in someone else's story. They weren't furniture, they were the story. Filipino forces had already broken Spanish military control across multiple provinces before any American ship appeared on the horizon. Then America arrived and brought its own assumptions. Now, pay attention. The Philippine-American War, which the American side often preferred to call an insurrection because calling it a war meant acknowledging Filipinos had a legitimate government, lasted officially from 1899 to 1902. Unofficially, resistance continued for years beyond that. American soldiers, many of them veterans of the Western frontier, encountered something they hadn't expected. They expected guerrilla tactics, they got those, but they also got something that destabilized their basic assumptions about combat effectiveness. Filipino fighters, including Moro warriors from Mindanao, walked through American rifle fire. Not metaphorically, literally walked through it. Multiple rounds, still closing distance, still attacking. American military reports documented incidents where soldiers emptied their standard-issue .38 caliber revolvers into charging Moro Yoromendados, warriors who had ritually committed to die fighting, and the fighters kept coming. This wasn't magic. This was a combination of adrenaline, physical conditioning, psychological preparation, and a fighting doctrine built around accepting damage to deliver damage. Stop. The U.S. Army changed its sidearm because of Filipino warriors. The .38 caliber revolver got replaced by the Colt 45, more stopping power. That decision echoes through American military doctrine all the way to the present. Filipino resistance literally changed the hardware of the most powerful military force of the 20th century. Pause on that. A group of people with blades and bolos fighting an empire with industrial-age weapons forced that empire to redesign its guns. And this happened because those fighters carried a combat system that had been refined, hidden, protected, and transmitted through centuries of exactly this kind of pressure. Now we're at the point where the story gets strange, because after independence, after the colonial era finally ended, Arnis nearly disappeared again. Not from colonial suppression this time, from something more insidious, cultural embarrassment. The 20th century brought a wave of modernization. Filipino elites, educated in American and Spanish institutions, associated indigenous practices with backwardness. Western boxing and judo got gym space. Arnis got associated with rural folk, street fighters, people without education. The same system that terrified colonial armies became something you apologized for knowing. If you want to understand exactly how a culture almost erases its own genius and what pulled Arnis back from that edge, subscribe to Echoes of Ancients. Because the next chapter of this story involves decisions made in the 1970s that changed everything, and it connects directly to why today, right now, military and law enforcement units across multiple countries train in a Filipino martial art as their primary weapon system. Important, the revival didn't come from academia. To be honest, it came from individuals who refused to let the knowledge die. Practitioners like Antonio Illustrissimo, a man who reportedly survived real blade encounters throughout his life, kept teaching. Antonio Pigafetta, the Italian chronicler who sailed with Magellan and survived Mactan, had written detailed observations about Filipino fighting styles in 1521. Those texts existed in archives. Filipino martial arts historians eventually found them and used them as evidence. This system is documented, old, legitimate, yours. In 1972, Arnis got formal recognition under the Marcos administration's cultural programs. Complicated politics, but undeniable outcome. The art moved into schools, into sports federations, into institutional memory. In 2009, the Philippine Congress passed Republic Act 9850, declaring Arnis the national martial art and sport of the Philippines. 300 years of colonial suppression, decades of post-colonial embarrassment, and then official recognition. The arc is long, but it bends towards something. Here's what the modern story reveals about the ancient one. When American special operations trainers in the 1970s started encountering Filipino martial arts, through practitioners in the United States, through direct contact with Filipino military, they didn't call it primitive, they called it advanced. Dog Brothers Martial Arts, the Dog Brothers training group that tests martial arts under full contact conditions, consistently identified Filipino systems as among the most pressure-tested combat methodologies they'd encountered. Modern Israeli Krav Maga borrows structural concepts from Arnis. The U.S. Marine Corps has incorporated Arnis-based techniques into its martial arts program. Think about that lineage. Pre-colonial Filipino farmers developed a combat system. Colonial powers tried to eliminate it. The people hid it in dance and celebration. Revolutionaries used it against empires. A military superpower redesigned its weapons because of it. And today, that same system trains the soldiers of multiple modern military forces. The art outlived every single regime that tried to kill it. That's not inspiration poster material. That's a structural fact about what happens when knowledge gets embedded deep enough into the body of a culture. You can suppress the explicit form. You can ban the weapons, ban the gatherings, execute the teachers. But if the knowledge is encoded in how people move, in the rhythm of their dances, in the way they hold a broom, in the footwork of children playing, you can't extract it. It becomes load-bearing. Remove it, and something collapses that you can't name. Ancient Filipino civilization understood something about knowledge transmission that colonial administrations consistently underestimated. Writing can be burned, books can be banned, but a body that knows how to move, that carries the geometry of combat in its muscle memory, is a library you can't confiscate. Think about it. The Spanish commander who called Arnis a dance that kills was more right than he knew. He thought he was describing a disguise. You know, he was actually describing the mechanism of survival. The dance wasn't hiding the art. The dance was the art. The killing and the dancing were the same thing, encoded in the same movements, inseparable, because they were never meant to be separate. Wait a second. That's what 3 centuries of pressure produced. A system so integrated into Filipino cultural identity that attacking one meant encountering the other. Every attempt to eradicate Arnis made it more essential. Every ban made it more sacred. Every colonial army that underestimated it wrote the same surprised report afterward, if they survived to write it at all. Wait a second. The Spanish commander's letter home. Truly a letter. The one that stopped mid-sentence. The one where he called it a dance that kills and ran out of words. He was reaching for something European language didn't have a category for. A civilization that had encoded its resistance into its art into its body, and its body into its history. He was trying to describe people who had made themselves, at a fundamental level, unkillable, not through invincibility, but through continuity, through transmission, through the stubborn insistence on passing something real from one generation to the next, regardless of who was watching, regardless of what was forbidden, regardless of what empires came and went on their shores. He called it a dance that kills. The Filipinos just called it theirs.